little funny story off the cuff with this. Steve Burbridge was his partner for a long time before he became my partner. He used to give as good as he got. Guys would tease the hell out of each other.
Yeah.
One day he says something to Danny Richards, and Danny walks out of the back room. That's where we all would sit and talk. And he's back out in the squad room, and he's like, "Damn that SOB Burbridge, blah, 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 blah." And Burbridge just sticks his head like halfway out of the doorway from the back room. And if you remember that, what was that Alfred Hitchcock movie?
Bates Motel.
Yeah, Bates Motel. He'd stick his face half out, and he'd say, now I can't think of the name of the
Norman.
I'm sorry?
Norman.
The character?
Norman.
Oh, yeah, Norman. You say, Norman, calm down. Come back and see your mother. And, oh, my God. Daddy's head would, like, explode. So that's kind of a little funny joke, a little dark humor between cops.
Yeah,
of course.
Because I'm glad you brought it up, Mike, because I feel like rivalries are one of those things that have kind of like fallen by the wayside, maybe because of player movement, in this era. It's just harder to have, the bitterness build up or for teams to face each other year in, year out. But, they packed a lot into that, the 7 years that I covered the Lakers, and then they, the breakup of Shaq and Kobe coincides with when I left LA for New York in 2004. But in that 7-year run, the number of times that they played the Blazers, the number of times that they played the Kings, the number of times that they played the Spurs, like there were serious rivalries with all of those teams and their fan bases. And so it was always amped up. There was always more to it. Like you never just walked in and thought, okay, this is just another series. Like Lakers and Suns the one year, fine, whatever. But Lakers Spurs brought something out. Lakers Kings, Lakers Blazers, like those series were intense. Although after 2000, the next two times the Lakers played the Blazers, they swept them, and it was best of 5 first round. So it meant that those were very short 3-0 series. But the Kings was a whole other level. The Kings, like the Blazers, were deeper than the Lakers. Had a better, like not a better starting five because Shaq and Kobe tilts the scales so far one way, but it was the same thing. Center, Shaq, check. Kobe, shooting guard, Kobe, check. Power forward, Chris Webber, check. Point guard, Mike Bibby, check. Small forward, Peja Stojakovic, check. Although maybe a toss-up with Rick Fox. Rick would argue the point, I'm sure. Turkoglu coming off the bench. They've got, behind Vlade, they've got Scott Pollard and some other bigs to hack Shaq. Doug Christie is one of the better defenders in the league to deal with Kobe. They were built to beat them, and they very nearly did. And there was a lot of bitterness there. You had Phil Jackson talking smack all the time. So at one point, one of those years against the Kings, he had referred to Sacramentans as redneck in some form or fashion, which is a very Phil phrasing. He loved saying in some form or fashion. He called them redneck in some form or fashion, and semi-civilized. And Arco Arena, which was their arena back then, it's this bandbox of an arena. The fans are right on top of the visiting bench, and therefore right on top of us too, because the press table was, back then we're always sitting courtside. Our seats were right next to the Laker bench. And so the fans that you would always hear about banging those cowbells, they're leaning right over the bench. Like they're hanging those things. Those are almost over their heads. They're that close, which meant they were that close to me also. So like we just had that stuff just ringing in our ears. Arco was loud as heck. That was one of the loudest arenas in the NBA for a long time. Those fans were as passionate as can be. They hated the Lakers, but everybody hated the Lakers. Like it's a funny thing being from Northern California originally, knowing how like in the Bay Area, you grow up hating everything about LA. You hate the Dodgers, hate the Lakers, hate everything about LA, glamour, Hollywood, all that stuff. And when I'm covering the Lakers, we're going around the country and everybody has that same feeling, right? Everybody resents the glitz of Hollywood and the Lakers, and they see them in a certain way. And especially for smaller towns that have a chip on their shoulder about it, like you ain't better than us, that kind of thing, right? Everybody's very provincial. And so the fan bases in places like Portland and Sacramento and San Antonio, smaller cities, definitely have that. So there's all this other stuff that feeds into it just from a fan perspective. And then Phil's talking smack, and there's Shaq's talking smack about the Kings, and Shaq's accusing Vlade of flopping, and Kobe elbows Mike Bibby in the nose at one point. There was just always just stuff happening. Rick Fox and Doug Christie were always getting into it, and of course they infamously had a fight in a preseason game one year
in the tunnel.
That's how bad it was. Like that's how things were different back then. Guys, the rivalry was so intense that guys were looking to throw down in a preseason game. So all of which is to say it was a blast. I loved it. The basketball was great. It was fun. The Kings were also, by the way, one of the most entertaining and most skilled teams of that era too. So I loved watching them. So all those Lakers Kings games I got to see, 4 games in the regular season every year, plus however many they would go in the playoffs each year. Those were some of my favorite games.
Making sure that you highlight the bad, but also making sure that you cover it fairly and don't come across as painting the entire profession with a broad brush that they don't deserve.
Yeah, it's a really great question and a difficult balance, I think, for journalism. For so long, journalism, local newspapers, local news outlets, wire services have been reliant on the police and still are for information about crimes that happen, about things that are going on in the community. But we also have the mandate to hold police accountable when they do things wrong. I think sometimes we also highlight police when they do things right. And beyond the call of duty, so to speak, beyond the day-to-day, but the big rescue or something like that. My mandate's a little different because I work for a wire service that sort of is national or international in scope. So I'm not necessarily doing some of the day-to-day stuff that my colleagues at the Daily News, the Post, Newsday, New York Times, TV stations, et cetera, are doing. But sometimes, you do have to have those battles with the higher ups about, statistics or about how discipline is done. Not so much that I am an advocate one way or the other, but that we want to know what's going on. We want transparency. And you saw that with the 50, the police personnel records that were hidden for a long time under 50A, and that was repealed and the union sued to block them from becoming public. And you still have issues. They are now public, but is the NYPD releasing all the material it should under the law? Those are sort of battles that you have to fight as a journalism community and also as an individual reporter. But I do think you bring up a really good question about sort of the balance of being a law enforcement reporter just in 2021 in the United States and covering the NYPD. Sometimes I wonder, am I are all my stories just negative stories about the police? Are all my stories positive stories about the police? And you want to strike not a balance, but just an accurate representation of what's going on.
As you know, Mike, it's a really important activity and really important field, and a satisfying field to be in. You can divide crimes, if you will, roughly into 2 types. One are, you might say, crimes of passion, murder or rape, horrible in their own right, but they're not done for money. They're done for other reasons. Anger, revenge, lust, whatever, however you want to put it. But the large majority of crimes are done primarily or solely for one reason, to make money. And when you engage in that, what you might call a predicate crime, and you gather money, you have to figure out what to do with it. There's that famous scene in Breaking Bad, where the main character, who's become a crystal meth manufacturer and dealer, has so much cash that he opens up this huge locker to show somebody, and it's just filled with millions and millions of dollars in bills. Well, obviously that's not a tenable situation. That money is subject to being lost or destroyed or stolen. So if you're in any way successful as a criminal and engaging in crimes that make you money, the flip side of that is you've got to figure out how to launder the money. And if you can prevent or help make more burdensome that money laundering process, that in turn hinders the ability of criminals to do their bad things. So I've kind of been involved as in AML for almost 20 years, and I've seen it grow in importance. It started out really in the late 60s as a measure to prevent drug dealers from going into banks, plopping down a bag of cash and saying, I want to open an account.
I don't think there was ever a window up until later in Kobe's career that he was definitively the best player in the league. Because when he was winning championships, he was not the best originally. He was not the best player in the league with Shaq. But from 2007 to I want to say 2011, 2012, that 5-year window, Kobe Bryant was definitively the best player in the league. Before LeBron really molded into his own and won his first few rings, Kobe Bryant, for that period where he won MVPs, he won championships. He went to 3 straight finals from 08 to 2010. That was his apex of his career, where he for sure was, without question, the best player in the league. But from 96 to 07, he was definitely one of the best, but never the best up until that aforementioned period.
Was Arvydas Sabonis started this? Chris Bosh modernized it. Arvydas Sabonis, when he came over for the Portland Trailblazers in 1995, was the first big man that we saw that would regularly shoot threes like he was a guard and make them at a good clip. Chris Bosh modernized that. Chris Bosh was the precursor to all the big men you see now, all the power forwards and centers that shoot the 3 ball like their point guards and make them at a good clip. So he started all that. As far as what the game currently is, Chris Bosh was way ahead of his time, because he was the first power forward I saw that would routinely take threes. And I remember watching Raptors games when he was there, and then later on Heat games. And I would be surprised. He would remind me, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you're good at that. Because I wasn't used to seeing a big man shoot threes and actually make them. Only when it was desperation time, like Tim Duncan made a 3 one time. That wasn't Tim Duncan's forte. He just shot that out of desperation to tie a game late. Otherwise, he would have never heaved it up. But Chris Bosh would take them regularly and sink them. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you can shoot threes? So I remember watching him and marveling at that, because I hadn't seen a big man do that before. And now, of course, it's commonplace. So for any of you young kids now that are like coming up and watching the NBA and learning to like it like we did in the mid 2000s, go back and watch Chris Bosh's highlights, because the reason that big men shoot threes and shoot them so well now is because of him. He started all that. So do your homework, youngins.
So he was a Crip, Orlando Anderson. So what happened was that while they're at the MGM, right, everybody's hanging out, and this dispute happens, and they got into this big beef. Suge and Tupac leave, and they go on Las Vegas Boulevard, I believe it was. I forget the big boulevard they were on. And this car pulls up, and it shoots individuals in the car shoot at Tupac and Suge. They graze Suge, but Tupac gets shot. Prior to this, he already had been shot in New York when he was at the Quad Studios. So this happened too, that further caused his demise. He goes to the hospital, lives for a little while, and then he passed away. What happened with that was that the guys that were in the car were Crip members, and they were Orlando Baby Lane. There were a few other guys that were in the car. I remember their names, I can't give offhand, but Keefe D was one of them that was in the car along with Dwayne, another guy, Dwayne Brown, and another individual, I forgot his name. They're all dead. The only guy who's alive to this day is Keefe D. Everybody else is deceased. Orlando and the other 2 guys are deceased. They all died in separate instances where they were shot and killed in Los Angeles. Now, I knew a lot about this because I was talking to the LAPD. I was going back and forth with people out in LA for these murders, because, I always kept abreast of what's going on, because remember, New York, LA are big cities.
Right.
So what happened in that case is that the case went through a lot of different hands. It went through the robbery homicide guys. At Las Vegas PD had the Tupac murder. But I was down in Las Vegas, and the Las Vegas guys were very skeptical about working with the Inglewood and the LAPD, because they saw that there were leaks in the departments, like people were leaking information.
Right.
So there was a trust issue between them. That's why Las Vegas wasn't so cooperative, and the case never got solved right away. But the case did have a connection. There was a connection because the perpetrators were from Los
Walking
Angeles.
towards this unknown. What goes through the mind of a bomb tech?
You try not to think too much of that end portion, like that you're going to get blown up. You want to try and get down there fast. Before I button you up, or before I get buttoned up in that suit, before the last part, before you walk down range, is getting that face shield put on. It's a constant conversation. You're getting intel. The biggest deal is intel. You want to know if anything's happened here before. You want to know, is there an active threat? Is the location just an active threat? Is it a church, synagogue, or an abortion clinic, or whatever it may be? You want to get all that information down prior to you walking down range. And a lot of times it's going to either raise the hair on your neck, or you're just going to feel like, let's just get down and get this going. Also, a lot of things, like I remember in ESU, you get these instructions, or you get these directions that, listen, when you get in there, it's going to be 5 doorways this way, it's going to be a long hallway, it's going to be a long street, and you find out that next thing you know, you walk into a wall, or a lot of your intel is not correct either. So you want to get down there fast. You want to get down, take a picture, an X-ray rather, we always say take a picture, and make your way back and then formulate a plan. And you're on your own. We don't have radio communications in the suits. You can get them, but we never want them. We never wanted to have somebody chirping in the background, or it could be a chief or somebody saying, get that guy on the radio. I want him to come back here. I want this. I want that. It's like, no, this is a bomb operation now, and we're going to handle it. And the goal is to get down range. The goal is whether, you're going to go down robotically, you're going to go down with a suit on, and you're going to take that picture, and you're going to come back, and you're going to do what you got to do, and you're going to formulate your plan. And you also have to remember that what happens elsewhere is more than likely going to happen here. So intel is another big deal.
When did you first hear that they were marking you for death?
Probably 6 months after we started, because at the beginning we made such a big dent, because then it graduated down lower and lower and lower. When we first started, man, we made a few thousand arrests the first year, and this precinct was only 1 square mile. Now you divide up the 1 square mile into like maybe 5 or 6 hot zones, drug dealing zones, and so taking that amount of people from the streets and all the buyers from all ethnic backgrounds, taking them in. So we knew we were hurting them. So the intelligence unit, which at the time it was good, the calls would come in, and I would get paperwork on it. I still have the old reports and such, that they were targeting me and my guys, but essentially me, because I was the leader, and but on the intelligence unit, when they give me a look, Sergeant Franzo, we got to tell you, so if you want some time off and you want to get out of the unit a little bit, you want to close down the unit a little bit for a while, take a breather and cool things down. You have a family and such. I said, no way. I said, no, these guys are so pumped. These guys are pumped. You can't pull the plug on them in midway. We were hitting them hard, So he says, F them, he said, but look, so because the sergeant says, hey, look, I'm telling you honest, Sergeant, you're a young guy, but I'm telling you from experience, if these guys want to kill you, they could kill you, because it was an open contract. It means it was like $35,000. I thought it was worth more than them, but I guess the money back then was worth some money, right? So 35 grand, that's what I'm worth. But they even had it on me. They had it on Rita Webb Smith, the community leader. They tried to kill her. They firebombed her house and such things like that. So and somebody was on a rooftop, and we had an informant on the rooftop who was with him, the guy with the rifle, who was he had me in his line of sight, and he didn't pull the trigger, but he says, "See how easy I can kill the Sarge."
I was not the young naive fellow I once was. Okay. One of the things they don't teach in many places, like police departments, even though it's considered a paramilitary organization, okay, with very strict discipline and rules, very unforgiving. I went in with my eyes open, with no expectations of any sort, really. I came in with my eyes open. I will say what I found. You had asked me, and I'm sorry I didn't answer it more clearly before, about my experience in the police academy. Police academy, the physical aspects of it was a walk in the park. Firearms, no problem. Where I will tell you honestly, where I had difficulty was in the academics, in particular, learning the penal law, and then on top of that, a separate book called the Criminal Procedure Law for New York State. They kind of overlap in certain ways, but yet they don't. And when you're a rookie in the academy, there's no leeway. It's either you know it or you don't. They're very formal here. He says, hold on. He says, I'll get you an application. He says, but I'll be very honest with you. You really need to come back for an interview, but you need to be wearing a suit and tie. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Obviously I don't know these things. I'm naive.
Yeah.
So he gives me the application, and he wishes me well. And I think that was the last time he thought he'd see me. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I come walking back up there in my Sunday best, in a conservative suit and tie, highly shined shoes, with the application completely filled out. And I don't see him. I see some receptionist and then somebody's secretary, and they take the application and they said, hold on, stay here for a little bit. We'll bring this to somebody. And about 20 minutes later, the lady comes out and says, Mr. Sadawi, she says, would you be agreeable to being interviewed right now for this application? I says, absolutely. So I'm brought into this grand office. It really was grand. And the person that's going to interview me has my application. He was reading it. And he turns around in the chair when his secretary brings me in. It's this Frenchman, the French Canadian, Mr. Toussaint. He says, I have to tell you, I didn't think I'd see you again. He says, but I'm
At least he was honest.
I'm sorry?
At least he was honest.
Yeah. He says, but I'm very impressed that you took my words so seriously and you come back the same day in a suit and tie. You must really want this job. I said, I really do. I really do. And
we wound up playing Kurt Abbott in the last games of the World Series. And Kurt was a nice player too. Heck, he started against Andy Pettitte, got a hit the first time up, and then got picked off. How about Mike Piazza and Kurt Abbott both getting picked off in a World Series game by a pitcher that my mother knew had the best pickoff move in baseball, and I had two guys in the World Series after we said, you don't even have to take a lead, dude. Don't stand with your foot on the bag if you want, and then get your secondary lead. He could pick your ass off when you think he's not throwing.
People have really taken a shine to this Knicks team. I'm one of them. It's just so refreshing to have a team that shows so much commitment to detail, that shows so much defensive intensity, which is what made the city fall in love with them in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Thibodeau has really been embraced by this city. And Julius Randle, after a really rough first season in New York, he's getting an MVP chance at the Garden. So to be around this team throughout this season, I imagine obviously it's been fun for you, but what's been the best thing? You talked about rooting earlier for people based on how they are off the court. What's been the best thing, therefore, about this particular team and covering it this season?
It's the same thing. It goes back to the character, and it's just so easy to get behind this team because there are just so many high character people in this organization. And on that team, I have so much respect for Coach, and I've known him for a very long time, obviously. And then obviously a lot of those players I've also known for a long time too. And to see such an amazing group come together, and they're just all about the work, and there's always more work to do, and it's always about the next step and more preparation. It's just really easy to support such a hardworking group of guys. And when you take a look at a guy like Julius Randle, I just really respect his character and everything that he brings to the table. And you're right, last year is not a great year for him, and he owned it. And then he did the work to change it. If you haven't read his Players Tribune article, it was spectacular. And
I did. Made me love him even more.
Yeah, it just, you really kind of get into his personality a little bit. And I think it's awesome that he is such a great family man. His wife, Kendra, is amazing. His son, Kaiden, is amazing. And I just love that the leader of that team is such a good person.
I'll tell you a story about Lauren that I will never, ever forget. And this is the kind of person she is. Besides the fact, for everybody's birthday, she would bake these ridiculous cakes designed, like she would make a weather cake. She made a cake out of a purse and a pair of shoes for Darlene one year. And she made a dachshund cake, because that was my dog's a dachshund. When my wife passed away in May of 2016, in August of 2016, I get contacted by the New York Mets asking if I'd like to throw out the first pitch at a game. And like, of course. So I don't know at this point. I'm like, where did this come from? I didn't ask to do it. So I'm just kind of wondering where it had come from. And I don't know, maybe it was Bruce Beck, somebody in the sports department, whatever. And it was an amazing experience. My kids came with me, my daughter-in-law. We went through the whole tour, through the locker room. We sat in the dugout. I was nervous as all heck, because I did not want to Baba Booey it or 50 Cent it, because that's all I could think of. And I remember warming up with my son, but here I am on Citi Field. I'm warming up with my son, and I'm thinking, and then I'm flashing back to having catches after dinner with my dad in the driveway between the two houses in Ozone Park, Queens. And now I'm with my baby, who's now 20 something years old, and I'm on the Mets field, Citi Field. And I remember running out to the mound, and I couldn't feel my legs, and I don't know, I kind of lollipopped it up, but I just wanted to make sure it didn't bounce and it went over the plate. But I found out the person who set that up was Lauren Scott. And she never, said anything to me until I kept digging and digging and digging. And then I finally found out. And that was one of the most beautiful, thoughtful things that anybody could. That meant, I don't know, it just meant so much to me. There was such a connection that night. It was such a beautiful night. And, those are the kinds of things that she will do for you as well. So we really, it's a really, really nice bunch of people. And I'd be lying if I told you in the past, I'm not going to bring up, not everybody was always that nice, but this crew, not that it's anybody terrible, but this crew was just, we were a special bunch. And as time is going by and I'm removed from it, and now we have to deal with, the tragedy of Kat, and I do realize, wow, we really had something special there.